So our second speaker is Richard Katsuda, and as I mentioned before, he's a teacher at Central High School, and this is a continuation high school of the Los Angeles Unified School District. And he's the co-chair and founding member of Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, and he's also a founding member of the Campaign for Justice back in 1996. So Richard, do you want to share some of your thoughts with us today?
Oh yeah. I guess to start off, I'm kind of think of myself as wearing two hats. One as a community activist and one as a teacher, educator. And I've been a community activist for over 30 years and a teacher for over 20. So I guess that makes me pretty old. But I think I have a fair amount to share in terms of my experience, and kind of with those two hats, I always look kind of through this lens of what are we learning? You know, what have we actually learned? And, you know, how deep are these lessons? And so when I think of that, I ask, you know, why are we here today? Because just as Grace mentioned, I'm a teacher at a continuation high school. And those of you who might not be familiar with continuation high schools, I have students with a pretty big range of skill levels and all. But one of the subjects I teach is math, and it's like an everyday occurrence where I'll be asking like basic math questions about fractions, decimals, percents, or whatever. And I'll ask students, and so often they'll say, oh yeah, I know, but I forget. Just tell me a little bit, and I'll remember. And I use that because I think it really says a lot for why we're here today as well, and what we as an American society or the Japanese American community have really learned about our history and about what's happening in our community. Because just looking at the title, the header for the title of our event today is Redress Remembered. It's really kind of like, it should be an oxymoron or a paradox or something where you say, are we fighting for redress? Or are we remembering the fight for redress? You know? And actually we're kind of doing both, but then it's kind of like, well, you know, here we are, 65 years after what happened to Japanese Americans, Japanese Latin Americans, yet we're still talking about, you know, dignity, redemption, and all of that for Japanese Latin Americans. But even more than that, we're like 20 years after 1988, the passage of the Civil Liberties Act, where we had a great celebration about, you know, what a great victory this was for Japanese American community. Yet here we are 20 years afterward, and we're still talking about fighting for redress equity for Japanese Latin Americans. So for me as a teacher, I think, wow, what have we actually learned, you know? And, you know, makes me think about, you know, the famous Santayana quote where, you know, we say, unless we learn from our mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them. And it reminds me of like my students, where they say, yeah, I learned the lesson, but how deep was that lesson? And, you know, you have to remind them every time, what have they actually learned? Or what have we actually learned in terms of what happened to our community, to Japanese Latin Americans? So I guess I want to go back a little bit to like how I first got started over 30 years ago. I took a class while I was at Stanford. I took a class from Edison Uno, who's kind of talked about as the father of the redress, Japanese American redress movement and all. And that's kind of from there, you know, then was the beginnings of talking about the community coming together to fight for what happened for my parents and all, and for our whole community. And so during the late 70s, early 80s, in 1980, my organization, Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, we were founded as the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations in 1980. And when I got, you know, when we started, I was in San Jose at the time. And, you know, people ask me, why are you doing this? Why are you getting involved? You know, we'll never get that. We'll never get redress from the American government. If they did that to us during World War II, you expect them to, you know, to really redeem themselves and to give us proper redress and all. And, you know, for me, I felt, well, I didn't actually openly say it too much, but I really thought to myself, you know, I don't think we'll ever get it. But we have to fight for it for the principle of the thing. We have to fight for our First Amendment right to petition for the redress of grievances. And so it's kind of both sides. I felt we have to do this because for the principle, it's part of building our community, improving our democratic ideals and our democratic actualization of those ideals in our society. And at the same time, I felt we have to push for something concrete, tangible in terms of monetary compensation, or else that lesson really will not be that deep. The American government will just, yeah, we're sorry, you know. So how do you deepen those lessons? It's always been kind of nagging in the back of my mind. And I remember 1981 when we were beginning the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. And I had a long discussion with William Maritani, who was a judge out of Philadelphia, and he was the only Japanese American who was on that Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. And we invited him to a day of remembrance in San Jose that I was working on. And at the time we had a long discussion about, well, do we go for monetary compensation, you know? Because he felt, and I told him I agreed with him essentially. And he said that if we go for monetary compensation, that if we get that, the lesson will be that, hey, everything's peachy keen now. He didn't quite use those terms, but those are my terms. But anyway, that everything has been remedied, you know, our community is healed, and, you know, let bygones be bygones and all that. And I said, yeah, I agree with you. But at the same time, I feel we need to fight for this concrete thing and see what happens from there. So anyway, throughout all of this, as I say, it's kind of like we'll never win this thing, never win redress, actual redress for Japanese Americans, but we got to keep pushing. So it was during the period from about 1982 to 1986, where it was, you know, in the kind of the aftermath of the commission hearings, they came out with the recommendations, but it was really tough trying to organize in the community and in Congress, try to get things rolling where there was some momentum to say, yeah, we actually feel that we can win this thing. So for about 5 years there, you know, it was like a really dead period. We're like really languishing, saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? But we started building 1987 was a pivotal year because people remember at the time, it was the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution. And so that, with other factors, were able to actually get the momentum. NCR sent a delegation to Washington, D.C., and so we're able to actually win passage of the Civil Liberties Act and get it signed on August 10th, 1988. And so after that, our community had great celebration, a deserving celebration. You know, that, hey, we won this redress, this presidential apology, and $20,000 to those who were interned or otherwise deprived of liberty during World War II. So with that, though, you know, it's like we won it, but it took another couple of years before we had to fight for the actual appropriations. And so finally in 1990, the presidential apology from our current president's father, George H.W. Bush, the apology came out and monetary compensation was finally being received by the oldest internees on down, former inmates on down.